Ever since we started dating, I've been constantly belittled by my mean sister-in-law and mother-in-law for my education and job. Even my husband, who should have been defending me, said, "It's true that you're less educated and just a humble nurse, so you can't help it." Moreover, there was always a hint of other women around my husband, but thinking of the family and friends who were happy for us when we got married, I thought, I'll overlook a little cheating. If I just endure, things might settle down once we have kids, so I tolerated it. However, the day before our postponed wedding, I woke up in the middle of the night and found my husband and my best friend Amy together in bed next to me. Realizing what was going on, I nonchalantly live-streamed the two of them. "My name is Claire, I'm 33 years old. I work at a regional university hospital. My husband Kent, who is 4 years older than me, is a gastroenterologist at the same hospital, and we got married 3 months ago. We don't have children yet. I first met Kent 4 years into my nursing career, at a social gathering after a study meeting held regularly by young volunteers at the hospital. Back then, although I was used to the job, my father back home was ill, so my free time was spent helping my mom, leaving me mentally drained. Because of that, even though I attended the study meetings, I regularly skipped the social gatherings named as networking parties. My best friend Amy, who had just started working as a pharmacist at the same hospital, told me, "I know it's tough with your dad and all, but you need to take a break or you'll burn out, Claire." So, I reluctantly joined. The gathering itself was not much different from the mixers and work parties I had attended during college, and once the main event was over, I felt I had done my duty and decided to head home, separating from those heading to the after-party. But it was Kent who approached me on my way to the station. "Where to?" "I can give you a ride if you want," he asked, rolling down his car window. Despite his reputation as a charming playboy, I was annoyed inside, thinking, does he think I'm that easy? But I smiled and firmly said, "No, I'll catch a taxi at the station," and started walking briskly. However, Kent seemed unfazed, slowly driving alongside me, mentioning it might rain or that I might not find a taxi at the station on a Friday night. As persistent as he was, I kept ignoring him until he said, "If you don't get in, it's going to cause trouble for the cars behind us," and seeing the stares from passers-by, I reluctantly agreed to let him drive me. In the car, I just nodded along to Kent talking non-stop, wishing I would get home soon. But when we turned the corner to my house, the situation took a sudden turn. There was an ambulance, not sounding its siren but with its red lights on, and next to it, my mother, pale and drenched from the rain that had started to fall, was standing there. Rushing over, my mother, trembling, told me that my father's condition had suddenly worsened after his bath. They had called for an ambulance, and they were about to transport him, but the hospital had not yet been decided. During that time, the emergency team was frantically searching for a hospital to accept my father, and after what felt like an eternity, they finally found one and my mother went with him in the ambulance. I was supposed to follow later, but as the ambulance drove off, I just collapsed in despair. Then, Kent, previously all smiles and charm, suddenly turned serious. He pulled me up, pushed me into the passenger seat, and followed the ambulance. Later, at the hospital, my father was diagnosed with cancer but successfully underwent surgery and recovered. Now, he and my mom are regularly walking to regain his strength, and the prognosis is good. On that day, after taking me to the hospital where my father was transported, Kent stayed with my mom and me until the early hours after my dad was admitted, and then he drove us home. Even after my father's surgery, Kent visited several times, offering many pieces of advice to my anxious mother as a doctor. While my parents and I were grateful for his extensive help amidst his busy schedule, Kent himself joked, "It's just what a doctor does, but really, I just wanted to impress you, Claire." However, I found myself increasingly drawn to Kent, and by the time my father was discharged, we started dating. Despite some ups and downs, after 8 years of dating, we finally got married. There were no issues on my side regarding the marriage. My parents trusted Kent completely, both as a doctor and as a partner for their daughter, and both were in tears when Kent formally proposed. However, my mother-in-law Hillary and sister-in-law Molly, who had been openly belittling me since we started dating, said, "We had hoped for someone with a better family background and education for our only son's wife. Just a nurse, that's disappointing." "That's right. She's just like the woman who stole our father away," they bitterly spat out. In fact, Kent's father was also a doctor, but when Kent and his siblings were still young, he left the hospital where he worked, opened his own clinic, and then eloped with a young nurse he had an affair with. After a tumultuous divorce, Kent's mother, left with young Kent and his sister, had to repay the debts incurred from starting the clinic. She managed to keep the clinic running single-handedly while raising her children by asking the local medical association to recommend doctors and by taking over as the owner. While I genuinely respect her as a woman for managing all this, it seems that within her and her daughter, a bitter resentment had fostered a stereotype that equates nurses with women who engage in affairs, and they simply couldn't accept that Kent, their precious son who was expected to take over the family clinic, was marrying a nurse. However, when Kent, now my husband, said, eventually, "When I take over the clinic, it would be best if you worked with me as a nurse. Having family as staff can save on taxes, and I can call on you without hesitation during nights and weekends. Hiring others wouldn't allow for that flexibility. It's the smartest way to run our clinic," his mother reluctantly agreed. But when I heard this, I felt a sense of discomfort in the way Kent presented it. 2 months after we got married, as the saying goes that a bad feeling often proves right, the marriage began to show troubling signs. The first sign was a letter that arrived for me. Although Kent and I had registered our marriage at his insistence, both of us were busy with work, and the wedding was postponed by 3 months. We also postponed searching for a new home, so we started our married life living separately. However, upon learning this, my mother-in-law argued, "Are you saying you don't even plan to move into a new home together? As a wife, you have a duty to devote yourself to your husband's family home." She began insisting that I move in with the in-laws after the wedding. Indeed, it was inevitable that Kent would eventually leave his current hospital job to take over the clinic next to his parents' home, and I was prepared that I would have to move in with them then. However, the thought of living surrounded by my unwelcoming mother-in-law and sister-in-law right from the start of our marriage was undeniably disheartening. So, I appealed to Kent, "At least until I can establish a rhythm for balancing work and home life, I'd like to delay moving in together." Initially, Kent showed some understanding, saying, "Okay, but I'll have to set a time limit. Otherwise, my mom and the rest won't accept it." Family conflicts are exactly what could interfere with work. However, when my mother-in-law and sister-in-law heard this, they unanimously opposed it, saying, "This is why we were against marrying a nurse. You have no significant education, yet you're so headstrong, always insisting on your own way." Moreover, Kent did not support me. He said, "It's your rebellious attitude that makes my mother and the rest dislike you even more. It's a fact that Claire neither has the education nor the looks, right? If you don't acknowledge reality and show a willingness to compromise, our marriage might fail." Eventually, under pressure from his mother and others, I was ordered to move into the family home as soon as the wedding was over. Looking back, I wonder why I didn't say at that time, "If we can't even decide where to live after marriage by ourselves, maybe we should get divorced." But at that point, I still had feelings for Kent, and more than anything, I didn't want to disappoint my parents, colleagues, and friends who were happy when we announced our marriage. Then, an anonymous letter arrived at my apartment in an unmarked envelope, containing photos of Kent entering a dubious hotel with an unknown woman and exposing himself inappropriately in a car. The photos seemed to be from the past year or two. In fact, during our 8 years of dating, there were several instances that made me suspect Kent's infidelity. Each time, it led to some arguments, but since we weren't formally engaged and given Kent's reputation as a flirt, I tried to overlook it, not making a big deal of each incident. But being confronted with this reality was truly hard to bear. The letter contained not only photographs but also a note with a phone number and the sender's identity, explaining the intent behind sending the letter. I called the number and spoke directly with the man who sent it. The woman in the photos turned out to be the wife of Nate, the man who sent the letter, and it seemed that she had been involved in an affair with Kent for over 5 years. When the affair came to light, considering their 3-year-old child, the wife proposed to settle the affair by asking Kent to end it, hoping to keep the matter quiet. However, recently, suspicions arose that the child might not be Kent's, leading them to get a DNA test after some persuasion. The test proved the child was indeed his, but realizing that the affair couldn't just be erased, Nate decided to divorce his wife. He also planned to sue Kent for damages, as Kent had been the cause of his family's breakdown. He told me, after further investigating Kent, I found out he had married you. If you don't comply willingly, this might go to court. In that case, it could also affect you, so although it's shocking, I thought you should know the whole truth. For a while, I avoided seeing Kent, using work as an excuse, and pondered alone, but I couldn't immediately decide what to do. While I kept postponing dealing with my issues, the long-delayed wedding day was fast approaching. Feeling unsettled, I thought, many guests and colleagues are fitting this into their busy schedules. I'll just get through the wedding and then think things over, and the day before the wedding arrived. But then, in the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up to find Kent and Amy beginning to get intimate in the bed right next to mine. In shock and anger, I couldn't find my voice at first, but perhaps it was for the best because they didn't realize I had woken up. Then I reached for my smartphone at my bedside and secretly live-streamed the two of them. The next day, the flamboyant wedding arranged by my mother-in-law took place at one of the top luxury hotels in the area. Colleagues invited and old friends from college who had traveled from afar, as well as Kent's college mentors, seemed to enjoy catching up, the conversation, and the food, despite being somewhat appalled by my mother-in-law's boasting and my sister-in-law's flashy dress. However, as the reception was drawing to a close, small screams of shock and bursts of unpleasant laughter began to emerge among the younger guests and acquaintances, creating a restless atmosphere. Older guests glanced around, wondering what was happening, but the commotion did not settle, with voices saying, "No way, I can't believe this. Someone can't just get away with this." Kent too looked puzzled. Thinking it was about time, I approached the MC, took the microphone, and stepped in front of the guests. As everyone's attention turned to me, wondering what was about to start, I calmly began, "Though we are in the middle of a pleasant chat, there is something important I need to announce to everyone here today." Some older guests speculated, perhaps about a pregnancy announcement, but they were completely mistaken. I signaled to a staff member next to me, the lights in the room dimmed, and a large screen appeared behind the high table. Then, I held up my smartphone, connected it to a projector, and displayed the screen. The screen showed a popular video streaming site's channel. I explained that this channel was actually for live streaming my pet African bullfrog, and after explaining this, I continued, "The video you are about to see was live-streamed late last night, just before our wedding. Those among you who have their email addresses with me received a link to this channel just before the ceremony started, so some of you may have already seen it." Voices from the younger guests saying, "Saw that," or "Been replaying it," emerged, and some even showed their smartphones to me. I nodded slightly to those people and continued, "Since it was late at night, many of you might not have watched it live, and since I didn't have everyone's email addresses, I couldn't notify everyone. So, I'd like to show it now." The live stream started with a close-up video of a tank in a dimly lit room, containing, of course, my pet African bullfrog. The guests were initially surprised by the close-up of the freely moving frog under bright lights, but soon laughter erupted at the humorous movements of the frog. As expected, the faces of Kent and another guest began to pale significantly. However, unaware of what was happening, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law complained, "What is this video? I thought you would at least express some gratitude to us. A close-up of a frog? That's disgusting. What are you thinking?" as they grumbled from the family table of the groom. But in the next moment, voices of a man and a woman that shouldn't have been there started blaring from the speakers, and a collective gasp of surprise erupted from the crowd. No wonder. As the audio played, the screen switched to 2 camera angles, showing Kent, shirtless and illuminated by the tank light, and Amy, my best friend. The reception hall fell silent as the video continued to show them whispering indecent words and embracing passionately. A quick glance around revealed that not only Kent and Amy, but also my mother-in-law and sister-in-law's faces were pale as ghosts. Just then, the image switched, now showing Kent smoking a cigarette with his back turned to the camera, and Amy draped over him after the deed. People who had been watching on their smartphones already knew, but those meeting Amy for the first time today realized that the woman in the video was one of the guests, Amy. Amy, caught by everyone's gaze, quickly looked down, but the real showdown was just beginning. I paused the video, had the lights turned back on, and took the microphone again to start speaking. What I need to report is exactly as you have just seen. My husband, Kent, and my best friend, Amy, have been repeatedly unfaithful, not only during our relationship, but even after our marriage. As proof, the video you just saw was live-streamed last night, showing them together behind my back. As I declared this firmly, gasps and murmurs of shock erupted from the crowd. Before the silence could settle, I confessed that I had been contemplating calling off the marriage with Kent until just before the wedding. Recently, I was informed by a husband that Kent has been repeatedly unfaithful with his wife over many years. Every time my mother-in-law and sister-in-law scorned me, Kent never defended me, saying, "It's true you're less educated and just a nurse, so what can you do?" It seems that his decision to marry me was influenced by such circumstances. As I said this, the guests looked at Kent with disbelief. Then, Nate, who had entered the room while the lights were down, took the microphone and said, embarrassingly, "I am the husband who was cheated on." As Claire just explained, Kent has had an inappropriate relationship with my wife for years, and he displayed on the screen the same photos he had sent me, with only his wife's face blurred. At the sight of these vivid photos, murmurs erupted again, and Nate continued, explaining that his wife had been Kent's patient, which changed the atmosphere instantly. Patient-doctor relationships are often seen as problematic due to the ethical implications of exploiting a patient's vulnerable position. And a scandal involving a doctor from a reputable university hospital, known for its core medical facilities, is a serious issue. The eyes around Kent, which had been half disgusted, now turned ice-cold. Nate continued, stating he was in divorce proceedings and seeking damages through lawyers from Kent, who had asked to delay any payments, saying, "I don't have enough money right now. I'm dating a nurse and planning to marry her soon. Then I can pay from her savings from before we married." He concluded by saying, "Well, as you can see, he's just trash." I felt sorry for Chihiro being deceived by such a man, so despite it being painful, I had to tell you the truth, and thanked me and my parents before quietly leaving. The screen was removed, and the room brightly lit again. However, my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, Kent, and Amy all had pale faces. Taking the microphone for the third time, I apologized to everyone. "I'm terribly sorry for showing such an unpleasant scene earlier." Then I explained that the footage from last night was because Kent had gone out for his last bachelor party and got very drunk. Amy, who had also been at the party, for some reason didn't take him to his own place but brought the intoxicated Kent to my apartment, and I had no choice but to put him to bed. I told her that the last train was over by then, so Amy also decided to stay the night in a somewhat involuntary way. As Amy and I were supposed to sleep on a futon at the foot of my bed, I woke up in the middle of the night to find Amy not next to me but on the bed with Kent, as you saw earlier. As I spoke, the attendees all looked disdainfully at Kent and Amy. Furthermore, they exposed that the two, unaware they were being live-streamed, had indulged in inappropriate actions and discussed, "After we get the money from Claire, we'll just come up with some excuse and break up. Just provoke her folks a bit, and they'll start harassing me right away. That's awesome. Maybe we can even get some alimony by blaming Claire. I guess bringing Kent to Claire's place drunk tonight was to have some fun, huh?" If that's the case, I wondered why Kent didn't marry Amy, who is a respectable pharmacist, instead of me, a mere nurse. But maybe it's because, as far as I know, Amy had at least 3 boyfriends during their relationship, so it probably wouldn't have worked out. As I casually threw in that last jab, exactly 3 attendees, coincidentally all doctors from the same university hospital where we work, 2 engaged and 1 married, suddenly made a noise as they started to stand up. Of the 3 doctors from our hospital who stood up, 2 were engaged to the daughter of a supervisor and married to a female colleague, respectively. Hearing this, the other guests spat out words filled with disdain. The rest also looked on with cold eyes. It wasn't so bad in real time, probably because it was late at night, but now that I see it, the replay count has become surprisingly high, I remarked. This prompted younger attendees, who had been checking my channel on their smartphones, to laugh and mock. Not just the replay count, but the number of comments is crazy too, really. It's even been featured on summary sites and clip videos. If this keeps up and the hospital's name comes out, it's gonna be a credibility issue. Hearing this, Kent and Amy's faces turned from pale to ashen, but their supervisors, in stark contrast, were livid with anger. The fallout from the scandal I revealed about Kent and Amy at the wedding reception spread far and wide. Although I made my channel private immediately after the reception due to requests from the supervisors, the scandal had already spread too far, and the hospital's upper management apparently scrambled to contain the damage. In the midst of this, my mother-in-law, who had striven to make her son Kent something to be proud of only to find out he was worse than her own husband, was initially in a state of shock. However, when she calmed down, what really concerned her was Kent mentioning that he had no substantial money at hand when Nate demanded alimony. This was particularly alarming because she had entrusted the majority of her savings to Kent when he finished his clinical training, believing his promise to take over the clinic and upgrade its medical equipment with some investments. The amount was in the 8 figures. Thus, despite facing a lawsuit from her son's mistress's husband, she doubted Kent's claim of having no money. When she pressed Kent and asked what happened with the investment, it turned out he had already spent all of it on his lavish lifestyle. Moreover, he had secretly taken out a huge loan using the family home and clinic as collateral to cover his tracks and then poured all of that into dubious investments, losing everything. He had also accumulated significant debt and, unable to borrow from reputable sources, had resorted to taking loans from shady, high-risk lenders. What are you thinking? With things like this, it's not just Molly's marriage prospects that are affected. You can't even provide a proper dowry, exclaimed the irate mother-in-law. Kent responded, it can't be helped. Investments are high risk, high reward, failures are part of it. Not only did he dismiss her concerns, but he also, concerned about Molly's marital prospects, arranged a matchmaking with a wealthy but problematic man without consent. Naturally, Molly was furious, exclaiming, trying to push your mess onto me is the lowest of the low. I'd be better off without a liability of a brother like you, leading to a massive argument that escalated to the point of involving the police. However, ultimately, under the leniency of a mother too soft on her son, it was decided that the family home and clinic would be sold to pay off the debts. Of course, that wasn't enough to cover the total debt, so they moved to a cheaper apartment, and both the mother-in-law and Molly had to start working multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet. Meanwhile, Nate proceeded methodically with the lawsuit for alimony, and when the case went public, Kent, fearing further scandal, agreed to a settlement. Naturally, Kent couldn't afford such an amount at present, so it was arranged that his future hospital salary would be garnished for repayment. Under normal circumstances, Kent's income from his university hospital job, combined with what he earned from moonlighting at other hospitals, could have been substantial. However, following the scandal, he was effectively fired after being urged to resign by his main employer. Additionally, the hospitals where he had been moonlighting also dismissed him, stating, "We don't need a doctor who causes disturbances." Naturally ostracized by hospitals and clinics connected to the university, and with his reputation tarnished locally, Kent ended up working at a hospital in a rural area of the neighboring county. However, rumors had spread there too, with people saying, even if we're desperate for doctors out here, we've ended up with a real piece of work. Colleagues and patients treated him coldly, and he looked nothing like the charismatic man he once was. As for Amy, her long-standing affair with her best friend's boyfriend was seen as a private matter and generally not pursued, though it was nothing to be proud of. However, her simultaneous inappropriate relationships with colleagues who were either married or engaged led to a tense atmosphere in the hospital once discovered. Moreover, one of the 3 men she was involved with, who happened to be her primary partner, was the grandson of a prominent local benefactor to the hospital. This connection caused significant issues, and like Kent, she was essentially forced to resign under the guise of it being her own decision. Amy, infuriated, confronted me at my parents' home, blaming me for exposing her boyfriends in such a public manner, which resulted in her being dumped by her main partner and losing her job. She even demanded alimony for the distress caused by the video exposure. However, I retorted, "You talk about privacy invasion, but you were the one caught on camera at my place late at night. If it was live-streamed, that's your own fault, isn't it?" I then replayed the live stream on my father's Pride and Joy, a 60-inch TV, in front of her and her parents, who were visibly embarrassed. They must have been misled by Amy's side of the story. They apologized but begged, "Please, clear up the misunderstanding. Tell everyone we've made peace. If not, we won't be able to live here anymore," trying to use tears to gain sympathy. But before I could respond, my parents, who had been listening, became furious. "How dare you say such shameless things? If you can't live here anymore, it's because of your daughter's lax moral standards, not our daughter's responsibility to fix. You reap what you sow. If you don't want more salt rubbed into your wounds, better leave now," they said as they ushered the 3 out the door. Amy and her parents lingered at the entrance, speaking through the intercom for a while, but after my mother threatened to call the police, they finally left quietly. From what I heard from a well-informed colleague, Amy was later sued for damages by the wives of the married men she had relationships with, and by the fiancés. Although she tried to settle, they did not agree, and she ended up paying whatever they demanded. Furthermore, many local people worked at the company of her primary partner, the grandson of the prominent benefactor, and she was harshly criticized as presumptuous and a loose woman by those who caught wind of the rumors. Rumors quickly spread around Amy's parents' home too, and unable to bear it, Amy's parents sold their home for a pittance and moved away. Furthermore, one of the doctors Amy had dated, who was married to a female doctor, ended up paying a substantial amount in alimony and property division due to this incident, leading to their divorce. Both being graduates of the same medical school, the female doctor, now a single mother due to the scandalous affair, garnered sympathy, and suddenly found herself shunned by peers, mentors, and seniors. In the medical world, where school cliques hold significant sway, this devastating scandal made re-employment in the area as difficult for him as it was for Kent. Thinking that all his misfortunes were Amy's fault, this doctor began to obsessively follow her around, determined to make her take responsibility. Wherever she went, Amy felt terrorized by the doctor chasing her and gave up working as a pharmacist, lamenting, "Why do I have to go through this? He had a good time dating a young and beautiful woman like me, while she drifted from one nightlife spot to another." In my view, both the doctor stalking her and Amy herself are blame shifters. After everything settled down with Kent and Amy, I received an offer to work as a nurse at an embassy in the city. Since childhood, I had dreamed of working abroad as a nurse and continued my language studies, but even I was surprised by this unexpected turn of events. However, Nate, who approached me with the offer, said, "You might be wary because this comes through me, but my wife's issues and this job are separate matters." He told me that my consistent efforts in learning new things and the high praise I received from supervisors and colleagues at work were the deciding factors. Still, I hesitated to move to the city, leaving my parents behind. But the joy of my work being recognized, combined with my weariness of being the subject of gossip and the guilt of having inconvenienced the hospital, helped me make up my mind. My parents told me, "Don't worry about us. As long as our child is happy, that's all that matters to us, and you don't need to worry about us. Once your dad is feeling better, we'll come and visit." Just as I decided to accept the offer, Kent and Amy, having somehow heard about it, bombarded me with emails and messages asking me to help them get jobs at the same embassy or to give them another chance. Of course, I had no intention of helping them, so I quickly canceled my old cell service and moved, finally enjoying some peace and quiet. Starting anew, I sometimes thought the live streaming might have been too much, but I realized it was a necessary step to cleanly cut ties with a self-centered husband, a treacherous friend, and difficult in-laws. Going forward, I hope to turn that chapter into a humorous story and keep striving to be true to myself. It's all your fault for having a wedding with a woman like that when I'm around. I didn't like it, so I just ruined it. I woke up in the hospital I was taken to, hearing my husband and best friend talking. I remember, in the middle of my long-awaited wedding, everything suddenly went black. As I continued to listen to their conversation, they started discussing something shocking. Sleeping pills. It turned out they were having an affair, and my best friend had added sleeping pills to my meal to sabotage the wedding. Knowing the truth, I decided to take revenge on them in my dazed state. My name is Michelle. I'm a stay-at-home mom living with my husband Tom and our son Michael. I've always had a complex about one thing. That we never had a wedding. 3 years ago, while I was pregnant with our child, Tom, who I was dating at the time, said, "The order is a bit reversed, but..." and proposed to me. I was over the moon about both the pregnancy and the proposal. However, my parents were strongly opposed. Even during the family gatherings, both families maintained their opposition. A shotgun wedding is out of the question. In response to my parents saying that, Tom's parents always seemed apologetic. And they assured me, no matter what decision you make, we'll make sure to take responsibility. Having an abortion wasn't an option for me, so I went against my parents' wishes and married Tom. At that time, we wanted a wedding but decided against it, considering the childbirth expenses. Now, almost 3 years after our son's birth, we still haven't had a wedding. It always bothered me. To someone like me, my husband finally said, "Let's have a wedding on Christmas." The reason being, I was gonna return to work at a hotel next spring, and our son was gonna start attending daycare. Knowing we'd be busier then, my husband felt we should have the wedding before that. Of course, I immediately agreed. I was so happy. Especially since my husband had been going out more often recently for drinks or other events, and I had started wondering, does he find it boring to be with me, or have I gone from being his lover and wife to just a mom? But it seems those worries were unfounded. The complex I had felt for so long vanished, and the recent concerns about Tom also seemed resolved. Looking back, I realize I was on cloud 9. The day after my husband's suggestion, I began planning the guest list. I have 4 close friends. I've been friends with them since high school, and even through college and starting our careers, we've remained tight-knit. Laura is a hardworking lawyer, Nancy is a working mom of 4-year-old twins, Rachel is currently expecting, and Isabel works at the same company as her husband. Though each of us is in a different stage in life, we regularly meet up for meals and trips, always staying in touch. I wanted to hand out wedding invitations to these 4 besties in person, so I decided to organize a lunch gathering. Congrats on the wedding. That sounds weird, right? Happy wedding, Michelle. Thanks for the invite. Rachel, the pregnant one, exclaimed. Thanks. Tom was like, let's have a wedding. I was so happy. But Rachel, make sure you don't overdo it, okay? You gotta take care of yourself. I said, only to be interrupted by Nancy, a mother of 2. No worries. I was working full-time when I was in her shoes. A wedding is a piece of cake. I had a tough time even with just 1 kid. Everyone's different, so really Rachel, don't push yourself. While we were discussing, Laura, the lawyer, playfully pinched my right shoulder. Hey! Don't flaunt your happiness like that. It's hard for Isabel and me to join the conversation. Right, Isabel? Isabel, looking a bit distracted, responded, huh? Oh, yeah. Seriously, don't show off. I observed Isabel and felt something was off. She seemed less lively than usual. Isabel was usually the lively one, often considered the cute youngest of our group of 4. So, her being unusually silent was definitely off. I wondered if the topics we were discussing were unsettling for Isabel, who was still single, or if they were subjects she'd rather we not touch upon. I chose not to delve deeper into it. On the day of my wedding, I was so excited I felt like I could fly. My husband and son were both dressed in matching tuxedos, and I finally got the chapel wedding I'd always dreamed of. My parents, who had initially opposed the marriage, finally seemed to accept and acknowledge us. They were all smiles at us, the newlyweds. I was worried about Rachel, who was pregnant, and Isabel, who seemed a bit down, but I was overjoyed to have all 4 of my dearest friends present with me. It was a truly, truly happy and wonderful wedding. I had planned so many special things for the reception afterwards. I was sure it would be a great time. I had no inkling of anything amiss. For the reception meal, we had prepared a French full course. I'd often heard brides say they were too nervous to eat much at their reception, but having been married for 3 years already, I was calm and collected. While enjoying the delicious French cuisine, I was comforted watching my son, seated between my husband and me, happily munching on his kid's meal. My son had been such a good boy, sitting quietly. We had promised him that if he got fussy, we'd take him to sit with his grandparents. He looked so adorable behaving like that. The reception went on without a hitch. Greetings from my husband's boss and colleagues I had worked closely with. A slideshow our friends had made showcasing our family's memories. There were tears and laughter. It truly was a great time. We went for a wardrobe change. My son had drawn patterns on our pristine white dress and suit with fabric crayons. All 3 of us matched. For the candlelight service and photo session, I had always known I wanted to wear this dress. After the candlelight service, I took photos with family, relatives, and friends. Everyone complimented my dress, which made me so happy. I caught a glimpse of my husband chatting with Isabel. They knew each other, so there was nothing unusual about it. You see, around the time my husband and I got legally married, Isabel was struggling with workplace harassment at her former job. So, she consulted my husband, who worked in HR, and he spoke on her behalf to his company, leading Isabel to transfer there. Since then, it seemed that Isabel often sought job advice from my husband. Considering I worked in a hotel, I figured my husband, being in the same workplace, would be better equipped to counsel her, so I too asked him to look out for Isabel. My husband appeared to be genuinely concerned, regularly assisting her since then. So, even when I saw Isabel laughing and taking pictures with my husband, I didn't think much of it. Things took a turn right before I was about to read a letter of gratitude to my parents. It happened while I was listening to a guest's speech. All of a sudden, my vision blurred, and everything in front of me seemed to shake. Up until that point, I felt perfectly fine, but all at once, my sight got fuzzy, and my thoughts became jumbled. I've got to hold it together. Even though that's what I thought, maintaining my seated posture became challenging. I'm gonna fall! By the time that thought crossed my mind, I was already on the floor. Michelle! What happened? I could faintly hear the alarmed voices of those around me. Someone shouted, "Call an ambulance," but I wanted to tell them, "No, I'm fine." Yet, I couldn't muster the strength to speak. My husband cradled me, constantly reassuring, "It's okay, it's gonna be all right, Michelle. It's just a sleeping pill, don't you worry. You'll be fine in a jiffy." Sleeping pill? What did he mean by that? I tried to figure it out, but I couldn't, and without understanding what he meant, I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was in a hospital. Beside me, my husband was holding my hand. Once he realized I was awake, he immediately called for the doctor. The doctor's diagnosis? An overdose of sleeping pills. "Do you recall taking anything?" the doctor asked. Of course, I had no such recollection. My husband seemed just as clueless, and we both shook our heads. The police wanted to get involved, considering the possibility of foul play. I told the police I had no memory of the event and had never taken sleeping pills. My husband stated, "We have no clue. Many people were around our food, so it's hard to say who might be suspicious. Heck, it might even be one of the hotel staff for all we know." I remembered me husband telling me, "It's just a sleeping pill, you'll be alright," before I blacked out, which made his statement seem odd to me. In the end, with neither of us having any leads, the culprit remained unidentified. The police said they'd continue their investigation and left. It was decided I should stay in the hospital for a couple of days just to be safe, and our son would be looked after by my parents. Relatives and friends rushed to the hospital for support. Once I was awake, and after the police finished their inquiries, they left. Left alone in the room, I was in a daze for a while. But after some time, feeling thirsty, I decided to drag my stand and head to the hospital shop to grab a drink. Then, in the hallway on the second floor near the store, I spotted my husband and Isabel together. "What's going on?" I thought as I approached. I couldn't believe my ears when I overheard their conversation. "There was no need to go that far. It wasn't a lethal dose, so it's fine. It's your fault for having a wedding with that woman when I'm around. I just ruined it because I didn't like it," Isabel said that, wrapping her arm around my husband. I couldn't process what was happening. What's their relationship? Are they just colleagues? What did she mean by lethal dose? I knew I couldn't get caught listening, so I hid behind a pillar in the hallway to overhear their conversation. My husband caressed Isabel's head, saying, "I'm real sorry. You're the only one that matters to me. I had a feeling Michelle was getting suspicious lately, so I just put on a show with that wedding. I explained it to you, didn't I? I don't want to be taken for a ride with ridiculous child support. It's just till we don't have to spend on Laura anymore. You know?" Isabel, narrowing her eyes at her husband, said in a coquettish voice, "You promised, remember?" Hearing that, even I could tell what kind of relationship my husband and Isabel had. They were having an affair. Deceiving me, keeping our marriage intact, all while continuing their illicit relationship. A marriage of convenience just for the sake of it. Moreover, Isabel, who wasn't satisfied with even that ceremony, drugged it to ruin it. I've been betrayed by my husband and Isabel, the two most important people, all this time. After that, tears wouldn't stop flowing. I couldn't bear to watch my husband and Isabel getting all lovey-dovey anymore. I gave up going to the hospital store, returned to my room, and pulled the sheets over my head. My emotions were all over the place, but oddly enough, my mind was clear. The more I thought about it, the more unforgivable what my husband and Isabel did became. I was filled with regret and sadness. "You should rest up." Even though the doctor told me that, I was wide awake and couldn't sleep. I cried all night, and as the sun rose, I was determined to get my revenge on the two of them. 24 hours ago, the love I thought I had for my husband, whom I believed I loved so much, had vanished. And the friendship I valued so much with Isabel had disappeared without a trace. With that resolve, I was plotting my revenge against the two. Unaware of this, my husband came to visit me first thing in the morning and tried to strike up various conversations. Honestly, it was nothing but stressful. "I'm still feeling a bit out of it, so I'm gonna sleep." Saying that, I pulled the covers over and pretended to sleep, all the while lost in thought. I want to take everything away from those two. From my husband, I want to take away our home, his job, and all his money. From Isabel, I want to take away her job, her friends, and my husband. Now, what should I do to achieve that? I couldn't come to a conclusion on my own. However, for now, I needed proof of my husband's and Isabel's affair. I knew that much was necessary. 2 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. Desiring swift revenge on the two of them, the very next day, I headed to a private investigator's office to gather evidence of Tom and Isabel's affair, and to find out whether Isabel had been prescribed sleeping pills. I had 2 requests. After that, I contacted Laura, who's a lawyer. Even though she was surprised when I told her we needed to talk right after my discharge, Laura made time for me. The meeting place? Laura's law office. "Want to go to a cafe or a restaurant?" I replied to her kind offer, "I'd like to talk somewhere private." So, it was decided to meet at the law firm where Laura worked. In the long run, I had thought of officially hiring her as my attorney, so this might have been for the best. I immediately told Laura everything I had seen that day at the hospital. Laura was visibly shocked, but after some thought, she said, "Come to think of it, Isabel was always praising Tom a lot." Then she added, "If it's true that Isabel had an affair with Tom and she's behind the incident, that's despicable. I'd like to think of Isabel as my close friend too, so I really don't want to believe this. However, I'll help you gather all the evidence thoroughly. If we don't find any, we'll pretend this conversation never happened. But if we do, I'll be fully on your side, Michelle." I could understand Laura's disbelief. I'd probably have a hard time believing it if I were in Laura's shoes too. For a while, under Laura's guidance, I tried to gather evidence without letting husband catch on. However, the results weren't great. His phone was securely locked and he always had it with him. He also seemed cautious, as the number of times he went out drinking had decreased. The private detective I hired had the same results. There were pictures of him and Isabel eating together, traveling in a car, but none of them provided solid evidence of an affair. The only progress was with the sleeping pills. I found out that Isabel, who had been bullied at work 3 years ago, had been prescribed them by a doctor, and I learned the type of drug she'd been given. I didn't know what type of sleeping pill I had been given, so I stored this information as evidence to eventually submit to the police. Then, I told Laura about the only evidence I found, which was the medicine. Laura suggested, "What if Michelle pretends to be away from home? Maybe Tom will let his guard down?" "No way. He'd never do that," I laughed, but Laura was serious. I laughed, but Laura was dead serious. "You know, I've handled quite a few divorce cases, and it's surprisingly common. Spouses doing things at home when the other's away. I think it's worth giving it a shot." So, I decided to give it a try. The timing was mid-February. Right around Valentine's Day. "I want to take our son and visit my parents out in Nebraska before I start working in March," I told him. When I said that, Tom responded, "Sounds great. Go ahead," and he was supportive. I told him I'd be gone for a week, leaving on a Thursday and coming back the following Wednesday. In reality, the plan was to stay in Nebraska for a couple of nights, show Tom pictures and video calls of us there to reassure him, and then see if anything happened over the weekend. It was all Laura's idea. She also suggested setting up hidden cameras at 3 points in the house: the entrance, living room, and bedroom. This was also Laura's idea, and the camera was something she borrowed from an acquaintance of hers. As planned, I sent Tom pictures of my son and me in Nebraska and made video calls to him. He genuinely seemed happy to see us having a good time. Maybe I had misunderstood what happened at the hospital. I couldn't see any signs of abnormal behavior from husband. But the next day shattered that notion. I checked the surveillance cameras I had set up. First thing in the morning, Tom had turned off the pet camera we use for our son or covered it with cloth. My husband was clearly acting strange. And then, at 7 p.m. It wasn't just husband who came home from work. He brought Isabel with him. Today's Friday. It must have been perfect for the two of them, having the next day off. Maybe Isabel will stay over the entire weekend. I quickly contacted Laura. "So, Isabel's the one he's cheating with, huh?" After Laura sounded disappointed, she said, "Come back here tomorrow. We're gonna get revenge on those two." She said that to me. All this time, on the surveillance footage, husband and Isabel were getting all cozy. I stared at the screen, mulling over the revenge plan Laura and I had devised. The next day, I had to go back home after being called into work. I told my parents and had them look after my son. I was hesitant to tell them the truth, but I knew if I did, my dad would say, "Hold on. I'm coming too." I could already picture him causing a scene, so I held back. Returning to New York, I visited Laura's office. Laura greeted me with a worried look. "Michelle, are you okay?" I'm fine. Sure, I was shocked for a moment when I saw it yesterday. But I've no love or affection left. I just want to break things off ASAP. Besides, knowing I'll have evidence makes me kinda excited. When I responded like that, Laura looked somewhat relieved. Then, the two of us reviewed the surveillance footage to finalize our plan. Once we confirmed that my husband and Isabel had left the house, we would break in. We had already secured some space for Laura and me in the bedroom closet, so we'd hide there. We'd monitor the surveillance footage, wait for my husband and Isabel to come home, and make our move when they showed evidence. During that, I would snap photos with my smartphone. Laura would record a video. However, my cautious husband didn't seem to want to leave the house at all. Isabel tried persuading him several times, saying, "Come on, let's go out. Let's have a date." But he declined every time. Watching with impatience, they finally left in the car to get groceries for dinner. As soon as Laura and I confirmed that, we executed our plan. We quickly went back to the house and successfully hid in the closet. After waiting for about an hour, my husband and Isabel returned, holding hands. It seemed like Isabel was gonna cook dinner, wearing an apron, but it was evident she had nothing on underneath. Seeing Isabel like that, my husband, seemingly overwhelmed by passion, pushed her onto the couch and started to make a move. We exchanged glances and nodded, then left the closet and approached the two of them. The first to notice me was my husband, who had been holding Isabel from behind. Our eyes met, and my husband froze for about 5 seconds, then turned pale, and immediately let go of Isabel. "Why'd you stop?" Isabel said in a playful voice, lifting her head, and she froze too. She said to the two of them, "I knew you two were in that kind of relationship. I wanted proof but couldn't get any. That's why I made up the story about going back home. Now I can get a divorce." "When did you find out?" my husband asked, his voice trembling. "I overheard you two at the hospital. So, I knew you both drugged me." "Wait a minute, that's not true. I didn't drug her. It was Isabel who did it on her own." As expected, my husband spilled the beans about the drug. I grinned. "Did you get it, Laura?" "Got it perfectly." With that, Laura entered the living room. "Why the heck is Laura here?" The first to react was Isabel. "Michelle hired me. I didn't want to believe that Isabel was cheating and drugging drinks, so I was helping her gather evidence to prove it wrong. But I was shocked to see that it was actually true on the video." "What do you mean by request?" Tom, having met Laura a few times and knowing her profession, asked anxiously. "Tom, what you did counts as infidelity. Michelle has the right to divorce you and claim alimony." "Whoa! Hold on. It's not like that. It was just a fling with Isabel. Please don't get the wrong idea." Laura's words shook him, and the husband quickly denied them. "Wait a minute. A fling? You told me once our kid grows up, you were gonna divorce Michelle, didn't you? Was that a lie?" "Of course it was. Who the hell would choose someone like you over their family?" Isabel was lost for words at husband's harsh statement. Seeing Isabel's reaction, Laura decided to pile on more. "I'm sorry to say this when you're upset, Isabel, but we also got testimony that you drugged Michelle's drink. So what? You can be charged with crime of injury. The police will be here any minute now." "What?" Laura was speechless. She seemed too shocked to say anything. "Wait. Stop it. It was just a joke, right? Tom, help me out here." Isabel cried out to my husband for help. Tom ignored Isabel's pleas. Laura said to him, "If you knew that Isabel was mixing in sleeping pills, there's a chance you could be considered an accomplice." "Why me? She did that on her own." Afterwards, when the police arrived and were shown the footage we had taken earlier, both Isabel and husband were taken to the station for questioning. Additionally, when I mentioned the information I'd obtained from a private investigator about her being prescribed sleeping pills, they responded, "We'll thoroughly investigate that matter as well." I was told that After Tom and Isabel were taken away, I booked a hotel room and toasted with Laura. I didn't want to spend another second in that house. And for the final touch at the hotel, I sent videos of the affair and the testimony about the sleeping pills to the company where Tom and Isabel worked. The effect was immediate. A week later, husband was questioned at the police station. Fortunately, he wasn't charged, but he did lose his job. After the company saw the 2 videos and confirmed the facts, several testimonies came forward about the 2 acting suspiciously at work. As a result, my husband was forced into voluntary retirement. Everything went according to mine and Laura's plan. Around that time, I began discussions about divorcing my husband. My husband came alone to Laura's office. "Didn't you hire a lawyer?" He replied, "I asked a friend, but they turned me down because they said the odds were overwhelmingly against me." Then, after taking a deep breath, he began to plead. "That's not why I came today. I came to ask Michelle for forgiveness. Please. I'll pay alimony or whatever it takes, just don't divorce me." Saying this, my husband got on his knees and begged. I was unmoved by his pleas. Why would anyone want to get back with a man who cheated and is now unemployed? At least, I don't. "Let's get a divorce." "No. I'll never do it again. Please reconsider. And Tom Jr. needs his father, right?" I was disgusted that he would bring up our son at this point. "We don't need a jobless father who's been unfaithful. Even without you, I'm confident I can raise our child without any hardship." Despite what I said, my husband tried to continue with his excuses and begging. Laura interrupted him. "This isn't going anywhere. Should we bring this to mediation? Tom, you're clearly at a disadvantage. The legal fees will just deplete your savings. For us, as long as we get the divorce, it doesn't matter how. But for you, it'll just be like throwing your money away." Tom held his head in his hands and let out a scream. After pondering for a good 5 minutes, my husband finally said, "Give me some time to think," he said in a strained voice, and then left the office. Seeing his state, Laura and I couldn't contain our laughter and burst out laughing. 2 weeks later, Tom messaged me agreeing to the divorce and we decided to meet again. The location was once again Laura's office. My husband who came looked extremely worn out. It seemed like he had given up this time, as he unemotionally accepted all the terms Laura proposed. In the end, he would pay a compensation of $15,000, monthly child support of $400, and I'd also get half of my husband's severance pay. We settled on the agreement with no division of assets for my husband. However, he seemed unable to find a new job and begged, "Can I make the compensation payments in installments?" Without any division of assets, the only money he had was his severance pay. Being jobless, he probably had no choice but to use that for living expenses. Reluctantly, I agreed to let him pay in installments by increasing the compensation to $16,000 as interest. And so, we got divorced without a hitch. I managed to get the money as planned and rendered my husband jobless. I believe I took everything from my husband, family, job, and money. Next is Isabel. 4 days after the divorce was finalized, I got a call from Isabel's lawyer, asking to settle the matter of the wedding out of court. Just like always, we decided to discuss it at Laura's office. As soon as Isabel entered the office, she pleaded, kneeling down, "Please forgive me. I'll pay any amount of compensation." Recalling my husband groveling in Laura's office, I had to chuckle, "Not gonna happen." That's what I replied. "Why? Aren't we friends?" "I'm hurt." The look on Isabel's face made me angry. "Who had an affair with a friend's husband and then drugged me? It was you who betrayed me first, wasn't it, Isabel? I don't consider you a friend anymore." "That's harsh. The sleeping pills weren't a big deal, and I broke up with Tom, didn't I?" Isabel shouted back. "So what? I'm still hurt. Besides, if you want Tom, he's all yours." As I said this, Isabel seemed a bit pleased. "But just so you know, he's unemployed." He quit his job after the affair with you got out. Now he's jobless and can't even pay me alimony. If you're okay with such a man, go ahead. I guess you're content with my leftovers, I said with a smug face. Suddenly, Isabel shrieked and lunged at me. Quickly, her lawyer stepped in to intervene. That was attempted injury, right? Laura remarked, causing the lawyer's expression to darken. As for the wedding issue, feel free to sue. But please let this one slide, the lawyer pleaded. Laura asked me, Michelle, are you okay with this? When I nodded in agreement, Laura said, all right, we'll drop the settlement. We'll proceed with suing Isabel.
No way! Laura, that's too harsh. I never did anything to you.
I'm not your friend. Nancy and Rachel, after hearing about this, were disgusted with you. Don't you think you're out of friends? When Laura said this, Isabel began crying hysterically. That's so unfair. What did I even do? Probably fearing another assault, Isabel was practically dragged out of the office by her lawyer. Laura and I burst into laughter. No matter what you did, it wasn't an affair and an injury case.
Well, which one is worse?
But with this, I successfully took away Isabel's job, friends, and husband. I felt very satisfied. It's been 6 months since then. In the end, since we didn't settle out of court, Isabel was arrested for causing injury. Isabel's parents apparently heard about the arrest from Laura and her friends, and they came to apologize with compensation. According to her parents, she won't likely get probation because she's been denying and showing a bad attitude. We've tried talking to her, but she seems to have given up and won't listen. On the other hand, her ex-husband seems to be struggling just to pay the compensation. He apparently hasn't been able to find a full-time job yet and is working a construction-related part-time job during the day. At night, he's juggling a job in the cleaning industry, desperately trying to cover alimony, child support, and his own living expenses. I'd be in a bit of a bind if the money stopped coming in, so I hope he doesn't work himself to the ground. As planned, I returned to the hotel job. I've been leaving my son in daycare, so I feel bad he might be lonely, but I make sure to spend all my off days playing with him. With the money I got from my ex-husband, I can easily make a down payment on a condo, so I'm also house hunting. Once things settle down at the hotel, I'm gonna pay the down payment and buy it. My current life, with work and time with my son, is much more fulfilling and fun than when I was a stay-at-home mom living with my ex. Moving forward, I want to cherish this life and hope to someday meet someone great. You've got a spare room, don't you? I'm moving in, so you need to leave. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law, who'd suddenly shown up at my brand new house, walked around sizing everything up, not even pausing to pay respects to my mother's memorial plaque before confronting me with this demand. My husband, Jason, acted like he didn't have a care in the world, lounging on the sofa with our cat even as he heard what was happening. I looked up to the heavens and thought, this is the end. Filled with a fiery determination for revenge, I calmly said, all right then, take care, and sold the house I'd barely lived in. My name is Madison, and I'm a 30-year-old office worker. Growing up in a single-parent household, I watched my mom struggle financially, so I worked hard to earn scholarships and relieve her burden as much as I could. She also wanted me to go to college. Probably because she had a hard time without a degree herself. To fulfill her wish, I studied relentlessly while others were out having fun and got into a top university, straight through. After graduating, I landed a job at a leading corporation. When the job offer came, my mom and I jumped for joy. The day I got my first paycheck, we splurged on sushi in Beverly Hills, but we were both so tense in the upscale environment that we couldn't even taste the food. I was worried about fitting in at a glamorous company since I'd always been focused on my studies, but my colleagues were very kind, and I managed to get by. Even with a good salary, my mom and I couldn't shake our frugal habits. She continued working part-time and living in our small apartment. Our only indulgence became going out to enjoy delicious meals occasionally. Every time we did, my mom would say, having such a wonderful daughter who can treat me to meals like this, I'm truly blessed. Thank you. That always made me feel proud and like all my efforts were worthwhile. But 4 years into my career, perhaps due to years of hardship, my mom's health began to decline. We went on a spa trip to hopefully improve her health, and although she seemed happy, her condition didn't get better. She kept going through cycles of rest and activity. I was consumed with worry. What would I do without her? That was all I could think about. That's when I met Jason. He was 2 years younger, a born salesman, and an outsourced sales rep with a silver tongue. Embarrassingly, at 27, I'd never had a boyfriend. Between studying and the fear of being judged for my lack of experience at my age, I had always run from any potential relationships, and before I knew it, I was 27. Jason effortlessly became a part of my life. We both didn't have fathers and loved cats. And since neither of us could keep a pet, sharing favorite cat videos and dreaming of having one someday was what brought us close. After a while, he suggested we go to a cafe. I agreed, heart racing, and he texted back that he'd wanted to ask sooner but was worried about being turned down. I was over the moon, not realizing at the time that it was probably a line he'd used before. But I believed he truly cared for me. And then, as our relationship started, something miraculous happened. My mom began to regain her spirits as she saw me dressing up and going out. She'd say with a smile, "I'll take care of the house. You go and have a good time," almost as if she were the one going on the date. I had always thought sacrificing my happiness was the way to repay her. But I realized that my happiness made her happy too, just as her happiness was mine. As Jason and I became closer, my mom's health improved, and she spent less time bedridden. When I told Jason about such a conversation with my mother, he proposed, saying, "Hey, why don't we just get married? That way, your mom can rest a little easier, you know?" Despite it being only 6 months into our relationship, I was completely smitten with Jason. His sister and mother were hairstylists who ran a salon together, and since they planned to live together in the future, he assured me that it wouldn't be a problem for him to live with my mother. When I introduced Jason to my mother, she was moved to tears and grasped both his hands, saying, "Please, take good care of Madison." Jason firmly held her hands in return and declared while looking into my mother's eyes, "I'm honored, ma'am. I might be younger and not very reliable, but I promise to make Madison happy." At that moment, I was so overjoyed I almost cried, but looking back now, I realize he was nothing but a terrible jerk. I would later come to understand how little experience I had with the opposite sex, or rather, how little I knew about the world. Following his declaration, Jason moved in with us, bringing along a slightly large suitcase. He suggested that it would be best to start living together in the house my mother was accustomed to. We welcomed Jason into our small apartment, and while my mother enthusiastically explained how everything worked, he barely listened and said, "Don't mind me, I doubt I'll be here much." I knew he was often out drinking for work and busy with client golf or surfing on Sundays, so I thought that was what he was referring to. But the reality was different. He truly never came home. On the rare occasions he did, he would just take a bath, sleep, and upon waking up, he would ask me, "Hey, can you give me some money for food?" At first, I didn't understand and asked him honestly, "Why don't you just eat here? Besides, what about your share of the living expenses, Jason?" Jason had not been contributing financially to the household, and my mother and I were living just as we had before. He then laughed with a puzzled look on his face. "Living expenses? Why should I, when I'm hardly ever here?" I almost agreed with him for a second, but then I shook myself out of it and challenged him.
Wait a minute. We're married, right? That means we're supposed to share our lives together, so.
You want me to come home every day?
No, I get that you're busy and maybe staying at friends' places, but I'd like to get a message from you when that's the case.
While we were dating, Jason was very attentive, always letting me know if he was going to be late for a date, and he never broke a promise. But after we got married, he stopped reading my texts, and days would go by without a reply. When I brought this up, Jason suddenly turned ice cold and said, "Didn't think you were the kind of woman to say stuff like that, and turned away. His cold expression was something I had never seen before, and it chilled me to the bone. So I blurted out, "Huh? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be possessive." And he instantly softened, "I know. But come on, we're married, right? Don't you trust me?" he asked, tilting his head. I shook my head vigorously. "No, that's not it. I do trust you," I said, almost in tears, and he looked into my eyes and whispered, "Thank you," then quickly added, "So, about $600 will do, okay?" Fearing he might leave me, I gave in and handed over the money. In hindsight, that was the beginning of a nightmare. To avoid worrying my mother, I couldn't confide in her and explained that Jason was just on a lot of business trips. Alone with my thoughts, I continued this strange marriage, where I would give money to Jason whenever he occasionally came home. When I finally couldn't stand it anymore and confronted him, he simply wrote his name on a divorce paper and handed it to me, saying, "If you get sick of this, you can leave me at any time." It's strange how humans work. Being given such an option made it impossible for me to leave. Jason had clearly read my mind. My mom noticed something was off with me, but she never tried to address it. As half a year passed, for some reason, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law started coming over to our place more often. Even though they supposedly ran a beauty salon, they'd show up on weekdays or weekends, without even bringing a small gift, sit in Jason's room while he was out, and say, "Don't mind us. Just some tea and snacks will do," and they'd stay for hours, sometimes even joining us for lunch or dinner. When I eavesdropped on their conversations, they were mostly bad-mouthing others, creating a really unpleasant atmosphere. One day, loud enough for me to hear, my sister-in-law said, "Wow, can't believe he married such a plain Jane. Her fashion sense is so drab," and with reckless abandon, my mother-in-law added, "Well, if she were attractive, she'd probably cheat on you," and they laughed heartily together. They didn't specify who, but I knew they were talking about me. When I was reeling from the shock and covering my ears, I heard the damning words, "Well, she's pretty much a good cash cow, isn't she?" And with only her mom around, said my sister-in-law, and my mother-in-law chimed in with a worldly tone, "Seems easy enough to get money out of her. Plus, we get to do whatever we want," and they cackled again. I wanted to storm out of the room and tell them to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Since that day, I've been feeling really down. Jason, as usual, didn't come home and didn't even read my messages. During this time, I failed to notice my mom's health deteriorating again. Then one day at work, I got a call that my mom had been rushed to the hospital by ambulance. When I got there, I found out she had fallen down the stairs of our apartment complex, severely injuring her back. The doctor said that, given her age, she'd likely have to use a wheelchair from now on. From what I was told, Mom had been feeling under the weather for quite some time, experiencing frequent bouts of dizziness. It seems that dizziness was the culprit behind her fall down the stairs. My mom kept apologizing, "I'm so sorry, Madison. I'm really sorry." Over and over, and I just shook my head, crying. I was determined to break through this tough situation. Given that my mom's hospital stay would be quite long, including rehabilitation, I decided to look for a wheelchair-accessible home. Fortunately, we had lived frugally, so there was a decent amount of savings. My mom always loved looking at home ads in the newspapers, often saying how much she'd like to live in such houses. I held on to the hope that buying the home she dreamt of might bring her spirit back. When I asked Jason for his opinion, he casually said, "Why not? I'd like my own room." "Oh yeah, let's get a cat too," and seeing Jason's happy face for the first time in a long while made me foolishly happy, so I enthusiastically started house hunting. Luckily, I found the perfect spec house right in our neighborhood. It was completely wheelchair accessible. I felt it was destiny and made an immediate purchase. I could afford a down payment of around $360,000, and thanks to being employed by a top-notch company, the mortgage was easily approved. Of course, Jason didn't contribute a dime, but that had become the norm. He only visited my mom once at the hospital. By the way, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, despite their frequent visits to our house, never came to see her. I hurried to finalize the house deal before my mom was discharged, and managed to move us in perfectly. It was honestly exhausting to balance work and moving, but thinking of my mom and Jason's happy faces, I pushed through. When my mom came to the new house in her wheelchair, her eyes sparkled as she looked around our model home-like place and exclaimed like a child, "I can't believe I get to live in a house like this. It feels like a dream." Jason too seemed to like his new room, as he started coming home more often. Then we went to the pet store together and brought home 2 adorable cats. Both Jason and my mom doted on the cats, and our home was filled with lively energy. Just as I was starting to think everything might turn out okay, tragedy struck again. 2 months after moving in, one morning, my mom didn't wake up. I found it strange and went to check on her, only to discover she had passed away, cold. I called an ambulance, but it was too late. She had suffered a heart attack. With the new house and everything else seemed so pointless now, I was overwhelmed by despair and hardly remember the funeral proceedings. Jason acted the part of the dutiful, gentle husband at the funeral, but as soon as we got home, he'd do nothing but flop on the couch and say, "Man, I'm beat," tossing the urn carelessly on a shelf. He then asked me, "When's dinner?" as I sat holding my mother's memorial plaque, and just played with the cat. Seeing this, I finally snapped back to reality. I'd realized a long time ago that my marriage was a mistake. But I'd been pretending everything was fine, so as not to worry my mother. I also didn't want to admit my failure to myself. But can I really call him my husband if he doesn't even comfort me as I mourn my beloved mother? As I was staring at my so-called husband, dumbfounded, the doorbell rang. When I went to answer it, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law, still dressed in their mourning clothes, barged in, saying, "Why, this place is huge. Why didn't you tell us about it?" You see, either my mother nor I had given my mother-in-law our new address. I assumed Jason would tell them, but it seemed he hadn't bothered, perhaps out of disinterest. As they walked around the house, eyeing everything greedily, they smirked at each other and said, "You've got spare rooms, right? We'll live here. You can leave." It seemed they were under the impression Jason bought the house. Jason, meanwhile, continued to relax on the couch with the cat, seemingly oblivious to everything. Looking up to the heavens, I thought it was all over, and then my mother-in-law, still hyped up, said, "The apartment we're living in now is so noisy. The landlord comes every day just because we're a bit behind on the rent." That's when I realized their frequent visits were to escape from their landlord. My sister-in-law grinned and said, "I'll take the upstairs south room." Madison always had a knack for choosing the good spots, didn't she? They saw my mother's death as an opportunity to shamelessly move themselves into my home. Naturally, I thought, I'll send these people packing to hell. Fine, I'll leave. Take care, then. As soon as I agreed, they nearly jumped for joy and said to Jason, "Jason, we can live together again. You really can't manage without us, can you?" Jason, perhaps too tired to care, lazily laughed and said, Yeah, I'm off to bed," and retreated to his room. With spring in their step, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law told me, "We'll be moving in on Tuesday in 2 weeks, so make sure you're out by then," and left. "Next week, huh?" I murmured, carefully placing my mother's memorial plaque, portrait, and ashes on the shelf, and whispered to her picture, "Watch over me, Mom," as if she was smiling back at me saying, "Give them hell." I promptly filled out the divorce papers I'd prepared earlier and rushed them to the courthouse, then started plotting my revenge. Come Monday, I was sitting at a cafe terrace with a view of the new house, hat pulled down over my eyes, waiting. There was a "for sale" sign by the new house's door plate. The autumn sky was clear, and as I was leisurely reading a book, a moving truck pulled up in front of the house, and out stepped Jason, my sister-in-law, and mother-in-law. I knew that Jason had been helping them move over the weekend. I had demurely asked him, "Please don't come back until the moving day. If I see you, I might get sentimental." They were perplexed by the "for sale" sign, but Jason nonchalantly suggested it might be a prank and tried to open the door with his key. Which of course didn't fit. I had changed the locks. Jason was frantically rattling the keys. Both my sister-in-law and mother-in-law looked on with anxious expressions. Frantically, he fiddled with the key as the movers looked on, ready to start.
What's the meaning of this for sale sign?
My sister-in-law and mother-in-law demanded, irritation rising in their voices. Jason, still seemingly unfazed, said, "I'll just make a call," and that's when my phone vibrated. I ignored it. And as he couldn't get through to me, panic began to set in on his face. The two women looked on anxiously as they and Jason received frosty stares from the movers. Finally, he called someone else, the real estate agency listed on the sign. And there I was, sipping my coffee. "Hello, I'm calling about a property in." Yes. "It's being sold without my consent. Could you come over here, please?" Jason began to explain on the phone when he was interrupted. It's already being sold by the owner? No, that can't be right. You want to sell it if I want to buy it? What are you talking about? Please hold on, and he hung up the phone. Then, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law, with faces like furious demons, stormed up to Jason and demanded, "Hold on a minute. Isn't this the house you bought?" No. I mean, it's not that I bought it, but isn't it considered joint property if you're married? Madison can't just sell it without consent, he retorted with surprising confidence, so I stepped in to deal with it myself. Surprised, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law turned to me and nearly snapped, "What have you done with this house?" I responded with a sly voice, "What have I done? I sold it. It's my property, after all. Feel free to buy it if you want." Oh. I thought living here meant that kind of arrangement, playing dumb. Jason turned pale and started, "Hey, you can't just do whatever you," to which I shot back, "What are you talking about? You haven't contributed a dime. And to talk about joint property when you haven't even contributed to living expenses since we got married. How dare you?" For the first time in my life, I was yelling at someone out of anger. Jason was taken aback by the sudden resistance from a woman who used to be compliant to him. I continued to press Jason, "You better give me back all the money I've given you. I'm ready with a lawyer," and shoved a business card and a claim for alimony in his face. I've always kept a household account book, so I had carefully calculated all the money I'd given to Jason. Though it was only a year and a half of marriage, the money I had handed over amounted to nearly $20,000. When Jason floundered, saying, "That was supposed to be for our living expenses, wasn't it?" "You can't just claim that," my sister-in-law and mother-in-law also chimed in, "Exactly. What are you even saying? A housewife receiving living expenses is a given. Claiming that back is terrifying for an elite woman," to which I shouted back, "Shut up. Don't meddle in someone else's business. And you too have some nerve." It felt like something inside me had exploded. Both my sister-in-law and mother-in-law seemed overwhelmed by my outburst and began to tremble, holding each other. There was no way I was going to lose to these women who were always bad-mouthing others behind their backs. Jason started to back away, looking like he might run off at any moment. He was the type of man who'd run when things got tough. "No use in running," I said firmly. "I'm going to make sure you settle this properly." It seemed my resolve had an impact. Jason, too, collapsed just like my sister-in-law and mother-in-law, looking completely lost. The movers, looking troubled, said, Where should we move the items to?" I replied, though it felt cruel, "I don't know. Ask them." Wondering where to move to when they don't even have a house, and I just smiled sweetly. What happened to them after they lost their place to go, I don't know. They probably rented a new apartment through some contacts of Jason. Jason had quit his job at a company soon after marrying me. He was scouted for a nightclub because of his playboy skills. Every night, he used the money from me like water, and while it seemed to go well at first, by the time I built our new house, he was scraping by. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law, unaware of such things, had come to depend on Jason's supposed financial strength based on the new house he had built and moved in as soon as my mother passed away. They used to say, "The beauty salon business is going well lately. We can support you, so you don't have to worry about anything." But in reality, The beauty salon managed by my mother-in-law had long since gone under. Swamped with debt and lacking real skill as hairdressers, they couldn't hold down jobs at any salon they went to. They had both been planning to rely on each other and ended up failing. Eventually, Jason got into trouble with some shady characters and disappeared. It was a fitting end for such a deadbeat man. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law are also missing, and I can't help but think they haven't exactly had the best lives. I couldn't get alimony from Jason, but I've come to see it as the cost of a life lesson. After the divorce, people have said I seem different, and somehow I've entered what you'd call my prime time for attracting others. It seems I used to be seen as serious and quiet, but now there's a certain settled confidence about me that has become attractive. I had been quite put off by the idea of marriage for a while, but as I started dining out with men more often, whenever the mood seemed to set right for something more, I'd excuse myself to go home because of my cats. Their reaction in such moments is quite telling of their character, so it's been a good strategy for sizing up men. In reality, I live in a pet-friendly apartment with my 2 cats. The other day, as I was sorting through my mother's belongings, I found a letter addressed to me. It was dated the month before she passed, right around when I'd settled into my new place. The letter was filled with various memories from my childhood through to my professional life, and it ended with her usual phrase, "To live in such a nice home, to lead such a good life, I've been blessed with a wonderful daughter. Thank you so much." I hugged that letter from my mother tightly and cried my eyes out for a while. Buying that new place definitely wasn't a waste, I've come to realize. From here on out, I'm committed to living positively and earnestly, keeping my mother's words close to my heart, and hoping to make someone feel as rewarded by me as